And get the show on the road.
Speak really into it in order for people to hear us. You should just let us know how we're doing,
Yeah.
because we're still getting used to this. Thank you.
Okay.
Watch out, introvert with a microphone.
Yeah, let's get started. The Board of School Directors for Montpelier-Roxbury School District, Public Schools. December 4th meeting starting at 6:34. The first order of business is public comment. This is a chance for the public to give feedback to the board, to alert us to issues, etc. This is a listening time for the board. So we do not respond in real time. That doesn't mean that we are not taking your input very seriously, and that is not extremely helpful for our tasks and our decision making. So with that said, do we have anyone who would like to make public comment either in the room? Let's start within the room first. Tom, go for it. And please introduce yourself. Just because we know who you are doesn't mean the folks at home do.
I'm Tom Frazier. Must say I'm surprised to see you have a meeting here in Roxbury. But anyway, I had a couple of questions. You know, since the last meeting when you determined that there was no educational use for the school, the select board has finally gotten off dead center and are starting to, make some plans for the future. But so right now, one of the things that everybody is focused on is the after school program. And I just looked through this online. I didn't really see anything about the after school program. I wonder where that is and what the status of it is. And I also like to bring up the idea that after school programs for all kids should be just as important as those for people in sports. You spend a tremendous amount of money on sports, and that's basically an after school program. And yet we can't get, $100,000 to run an after school program for our kids. So I think those two things need to be put on an equal footing. What else do I have? So is there something in the budget for after school program that I didn't see?
Yeah, we'll get to that. Yeah, we'll get to that during the discussion.
Okay. So the other option, or the other thing I would offer, and of course I'm in no position to offer anything, but the select board is very interested in the after school program, and it may be that we can provide the space for the program if you provided the program. That way it would cut your costs, since we'll be maintaining the building, and make it more acceptable to the Montpelier crowd. You don't even provide a program for your own kids in Montpelier, so not a free program. But if you equate the after school program for all kids with the sports programs for a few kids, I think you can, you look at it a little differently and maybe be a little more amenable to funding it to a greater degree than what you have in the past. So, the other thing I had a question about, why is the enrollment in Roxbury, the enrollment projections, why is that called out specifically in these documents? We're all one program now. There shouldn't be any delineation between the schools or between the students. You're not talking about schools now. You're talking about, separating out the students, which is certainly an equity issue. So yeah, that's all I had.
Excellent. Thank you, Tom. Anyone else in the room? And online, we do. All right, no one online. Okay, next we're going to move to the consent agenda. The consent agenda is where routine orders of business are bundled and quickly approved. It's basically to run more efficient meetings. There are items like approval of minutes, et cetera, that don't necessarily need individual action by the board. If there is something that does need individual action, a board member can pull it off and separately discuss it and pass it in a separate motion. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I move we approve the consent agenda.
Do you need to put the letter on?
Oh, and we're adding a letter from the district to the select board of Roxbury as a result of our last meeting where we found that there was not a necessary educational use for the building, which triggers the district to offer the building back to the town of Roxbury for the sum of $1. So our attorney drafted a letter to that effect. So that is added to the consent agenda, and let's do another motion approving that, just to make it clear that that's part of the.
I'll amend my motion. I move we approve the consent agenda with the addition of the letter addressed to the Roxbury Select Board.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion or questions? Tim?
Just pointing out, because I don't know if he's there yet, but Scott and Rhett both had concerns with the date. I think that was in that letter. And if I didn't know if you wanted to take that up before moving forward, or if it was okay to extend that if everyone was okay with extending the date for a little bit past town meeting. Did you see those emails, Jim?
Yes. Are
Okay.
people okay with extending the date? Right now, the date is basically right after town meeting day. And Scott brought up by email, since he's not able to be here, that perhaps we should give a little more time because Roxbury is having a vote on town meeting. They would give them some time to process that vote and discuss it. I actually think that is not the worst idea. And they could obviously inform us before the date as well. My understanding is that we could agree to extend the date, but again, Roxbury, as soon as it gets the letter, could accept it a minute afterwards. So I'm okay adding extra time.
For us or for them,
It will just give them more time before we know.
unintended consequences.
Yeah, I don't.
So
and I don't-
to me then.
Another question.
How long should we extend it? I know it's basically 90 days. I mean, I was actually thinking of being a bit more generous.
Oh,
I was thinking like giving them 120 days,
4 months,
4 months.
essentially.
Yeah, which would give them time to move through their process and then have a meeting to discuss it.
That makes sense to me.
And it's not like people are knocking down the door to buy this building.
My only question was going to be, Libby, you had the chat with the lawyer. Was there any reason he chose 90 days or was that just like a standard term?
No, it was just like a standard. He said 90 days seemed reasonable to me. That was what he said. I don't think he was equating town meeting day votes or anything like that. Like he wasn't considering that.
Okay.
So then a point of process, is it? Maybe what we should do is just there's a motion on the table. What are we?
Jill could amend her motion to include the letter as amended, which would be with moving it.
Changing the number in the letter from 90 to 120.
Well, it's a date specific, so.
Oh, got it.
It's right now, it's April,
30
it's
days
March
after March.
5th. How about,
Tom, when does the select board meet? What day of the week?
Mondays, right?
First and third Monday of the.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
why don't I make it April 4th? That's the Friday of that first weekend in April, so that would give them that would give them 4 full weeks,
Okay, that sounds good to me.
plus a couple spare days.
So I'd like to amend my motion to alter the letter to be, change the date from March 5th, 2025 to April 4th, 2025 for the town of Roxbury to notify on or before April 4th, 2025 for the town of Roxbury to notify the board that it intends to exercise its rights and purchase the school.
Do we need to, do we need
I
to
need a
second that?
second,
Do we,
yeah.
okay, I'll second that amendment.
Any further discussion or questions? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
You've got plenty of ayes there.
Those jigsaws.
Any opposed or abstentions? Great, consent agenda passes. And now we are on to FY 26 budget.
For the board members who are at home and the administrators who are online at home, I won't be able to see you, or Christine won't be able to see you really. So just unmute yourself and interrupt us at any moment that you need to. If you're home. So let's get this. up. So this is the FY 26 budget presentation number 1. Board members who have been with us for several years now will note that this is a very different, well, it's not a tremendously different presentation of look and style, but it is a different look at our budget the first time around. So typically with the first budget presentation, it is literally the first draft of a budget. That is not what this is. This is a draft of a level programmed or near level program budget that the board discussed a couple weeks ago now, a couple board meetings ago. But because there are lots of unknowns at the state level and pieces that we simply don't know and would be making too many assumptions, and with all the changes in the law, we decided to not put the budget all the way down through the tax rate for this time around. So you won't see that. There's just too much of assumptions that would be made. We can talk about some things verbally, but it's not in the presentation. So with that being said, we'll be talking about the district information, some enrollment projections, our expenses and revenues, the capital plan, our fund balance, and then have some time for discussion. Just some district information of where we're at right now for our student populations, how our schools are broken out. This is as of the October 1st count, so keep that in mind. Some kids have moved out, some kids have moved in since October 1st. However, this is from the October 1st count because that's what matters for budget season. So at Main Street Middle School, we have 349 students. At Union, we have 394. And at Montpelier High School, we have 407 on October 1st, rather. This is just broken out by the demographics, again, as of the October 1 count. It could be different now. So board members, this is just for your information. And we want to talk about some district drivers, reminding the board and the public that the board's focus are threefold: academic achievement for all students, safety, inclusion, and belonging for every member of our community, and a commitment to open communication with the community. Those are the board's focus and priorities. Internally, our theory of growth has been the same for multiple years now, based on these 4 pillars for continuous improvement. Our goal is to build limitless futures for any learner. So when they graduate from our system, they can choose anything they'd like to be and have the skills and confidence in order to do so. In order to do that, we believe that if we have collective responsibility and collaborative practices, formalized essential learning, a timely system to enrich, intervene, and remediate, and high quality instruction in every classroom, we can achieve that goal of limitless futures for every learner. In terms of budgetary investments in these 4 pillars, this is a chart that we included in the presentation last year that was well accepted by the board members. And so we split it up into staffing, professional learning, and leadership. I won't go through all of these pieces, but there are several links on this page that I encourage the board and the public to click on so they can see all the work that's been going on in these 4 areas. And plus, our website is basically a completely different world than it was even 3 years ago, with just an enormous amount of information for our community about what's happening in our school district. So let's get into budget. The purpose of today's presentation is to provide the board and community accurate information. There's several changes from previous years, and one of the big ones for this presentation, as I alluded to earlier, is that we're not including numbers that are unknown or estimates in this presentation. There's just simply too many variables that both Christina and I and the rest of the educational world in Vermont are unsure of at the moment. So we don't want to talk about those just yet because there's so many unknowns and variables. We want to provide our board with information to better understand and be able to discuss MRPS education spending. We want to provide the board with information regarding what level programming or as close to level programming as we can get, as requested at the November 6th meeting. And Scott had the nice definition that level programming would equal no increases and decreases. I will say that our schools have done their budgets, their school budgets, and did make some decreases in there. So this isn't exactly a level program budget, but it is close to a level program budget. And then determine directions for next steps in budget development that could include a potential reduction amount if that's what the board wants to do. Just some reminder and resources for our community and board members that Vermont's education funding system is a statewide funding system. That means every district and supervisory union in the state receives the funding they ask for. So whatever we send to the state that the voters agree upon, we're going to get that amount of money, and it's the same for every district in the state. I don't think that was truly clear in the state, at least in my head even, until last year, when everybody's budget decisions influenced everybody else's. I believe we're in a similar predicament this year in terms of that. The money comes out of one fund at the state level. This fund is filled mainly by property taxes. There's a few other pieces that go into that, but the main source is property taxes. An increased spending in other districts will influence the Montpelier and Roxbury tax bills because it's all going into one fund. The tax rate's set to raise all the money needed to cover the cost of all the approved budgets. So we all influence each other. There's some really nice resources coming out right now. Vermont Public has a video with our friend Lola Dufour on education finance. And then the Agency of Education hired the New Solutions Group to write explanation in as plain as language as we could around education funding, and that's linked in this as well. It's a 36-page document. So to explain education finance in Vermont, it takes 36 pages to do so, which should tell you something. In addition, it's not on here, but Anna has done a beautiful job of making a budget page on our website that has tons of resources already. And the other piece that we started this week was frequently asked questions that we started with our caregiver alliances to help us craft those. And any questions that come into the school board or the administration will be added to that frequently asked questions document. So we have a lot of resources available for people on our budget page, which you can find by going to the school board link, and then it's on the budget page. As discussed, I believe in the November 6th meeting, the administration's recommended priorities is when we're thinking about the budget is to maintain our resources for effective MTSS model. That's our 4 pillars in SEL and academics. We want to abide by the MRPS class size policy, educational quality standards, and research-backed guidelines for staffing levels. Allow for professional learning and equitable and inclusive classroom instruction, which is our 4th pillar. maintain and sustain safe facilities, ensure the continuation of co-curricular activities. That's a core value in our district. Develop a budget that's fiscally responsible for taxpayers. That means we want to explore all our systems for efficiencies and ensure financial coherence across the buildings. Our administrative team have done a really nice job the last couple months working there.
The ensure continuation of co-curricular activities is one of those priorities that was raised during public comment just
Mhm.
now. The question around after school, enrichment, athletics, all of those things are included in co-curricular.
Yes, thank you. And protect services dedicated to our most vulnerable children and families. This is just a quick glossary of terms of what some pieces of information for the public. If you're at home, take a picture of this screen. And if you're here, you've got the paper version of this. It's also, I believe, on our website or on the board's page as well. So people can link to this as we're going through this. I am determined this budget season to figure out a good metaphor or analogy for the dollar yield. I've yet to do that, but it's something I think about in the shower. And so just make sure that you have this by your side because these terms are not regular and they flow off Christina and my tongue because we live in this world. So our budget unknowns, some of these are crossed out because we now know them before the board or this presentation was made. And in the last couple of days, we now have some more information. The tax factors that are unknown, we still do not know our long-term weighted ADM, average daily membership. That's our equalized pupils. So our budget is not based on the number of kids that we have in seats. It's based on a weighted number of kids. So different kids have different weights attached to them based on a few different identifiers. The business managers across the state have been begging for that from the Agency of Education, but because of some staffing situations at the Agency of Education, the only answer one business manager has gotten is you'll get it soon. So we're not sure when we're going to get that number. The property dollar yield is what comes out in the tax commissioner's letter on December 1st. It came December 2nd because December 1st was a Sunday. And so that is now a known, but keep in mind that that number is an estimation until it's set in law in the spring. And people's budgets decisions will influence that number going up or down. So now we do have an idea around that. The cent discount or new calculation for the cent discount, if people remember last January or February at the last minute with Act 127, it was revised to include a cent discount. We actually do know that now. We figured that we received information late yesterday about that. So we have that information, so that actually should be crossed out as well. The common level of appraisal was also part of the tax commissioner's letter on December 2nd. Thank you, Jill Remick. And so we do know that number as well now. In terms of revenues, we have not gotten information on the EEE grant that has to do with preschool. We do not know the transportation aid, and we don't know our prior year surplus allocation for our fund balance. Right? Yeah. And in the expenses, we are negotiating this year with both the MREA, which is our teachers union, and the MRESSA, which is our instructional assistants union. So we're in negotiations. We have not come to a conclusion around salary increases for either of those unions. And we don't know the Career Center 6th semester average as of yet. Go ahead, Mia.
What is prior year surplus allocation? That is a new phrase to me.
We'll talk about that today. I put a placeholder in. The board hasn't made a decision on how much they want to use on the revenue side.
We pull from fund balance to offset. So,
Yes.
okay, thank
Yeah.
you.
So
I just didn't know, I didn't remember it called that. Okay.
Well, the fund balance is more than just the prior year, right?
Yeah.
yeah,
But when we use it as a revenue source, that's why it's listed as an unknown revenue source.
Okay.
I'll need guidance from the board in order to allocate that.
Average is the tuition we pay for our CCV students.
Mhm. Christina, you're on. Make sure that mic's moved over so they hear your voice.
Okay, as Libby said, this looks a little different. We didn't go through all the steps, not knowing the equalized pupils or the the cent discount until just yesterday. So currently our proposed budget is an increase of $1.8 million. A lot of that is salary and benefits. So that's a 5.92 increase in our general budget.
This is a close to level programmed budget, just to keep in mind. Yeah. Slight decrease in some of the money, yes. Go ahead.
Okay, and in this draft, we also included the capital plan, assuming the board would like to continue contributing to that, 270,000. Then moving down to the non-tax revenues, there's a decrease here because we used up all of our IDEA fund balance. So that's special education expenses. And because of that decrease in our non-tax revenues, our education spending went up significantly to 8%. And so what else did we learn today? We learned the CLA. We haven't included that now because we just don't, it's an estimate. So we don't want to get you down to the tax. We don't want to talk about the tax rate until we have all those solid numbers.
So to be clear for our community, where you see an 8.22%, that's not the tax rate. That's an increase in spending. It's not the tax rate. The tax rate is nowhere on here.
Really,
We
in order
need-
to know that,
Mhm.
which we don't have. I see. Okay.
Do you want to do the enrollment? Or
Yeah, so these are the enrollment projections. Just keep in mind that the monitoring documents from November 6th had a lot of information on class size policy in here. So we have this slide. We always have this slide on here, but more information is on those linked class size and policy monitoring pieces.
Okay, so the next few slides, we're going to talk about the total budget, which includes the capital plan. So we'll go through expenses by program. And this is, oh, sorry, next
sorry.
slide.
Go ahead.
Expenses by program. So this is level programming, as Libby said. The common theme here is going to be health insurance increases of only 12%. We were talking about 17% at the beginning of the budget process, but it came in at 12%. So in general education, there's a 3.4% increase due to health insurance and contract negotiations. Special education, there's a 13% increase. Those are health insurance, contract negotiations, and increased professional services. And this is where we added the IDEA positions. So there were 3 positions that we had to move into the general fund. Moving down to co-curricular, that's just salary and benefits. Same with the student support section, the nurse, guidance, social workers, and speech. The staff support, so library, tech, curriculum, and professional development, that increase is due to health insurance and salary increases. The school board and superintendent function increased by 12%. This is health insurance premiums, and we also added the early retirement incentives that were agreed on for last year.
Actually, there's other conditions or something under that, right? Like where does that 521,000?
Oh, what does that represent? So
Yeah.
that's the superintendent's office, legal fees. And the early retirement incentives were offers that we made with the teacher. No, I'm sorry. It was AFSCME, I believe, last year. We made some agreements for early retirement incentives. So that's paid out over 3 years. So we have to budget that in.
While you've held on for a second, Jake's got his hand up. Jake, do you want to unmute?
I have a couple questions. The first one is the IDEA is federal money, and you said we added 3 people to the general budget. Is that connected to like in the prior slide? We had offsetting revenues that was that used to pay for those 3 people, but now we're retaining the people, but we don't have that money anymore. Am I way off on that?
We essentially had a carryover. So with federal grants like IDEA, if you don't spend the whole grant amount in 1 year, which we didn't because we couldn't fill positions or something like that, then a certain amount of that gets carried over into the IDEA. And because it's almost like a surplus, it's almost like a fund balance in special education. And so because we had a large portion there, we were able to fund 3 positions for, I think, 2 years out of that carryover. Don't quote me on the 2 years though. And and now we've used up that money now. So those positions need to be added to the local budget.
Okay. All right. And then my second question is, there's a factor in here for contract negotiations. Aren't those sort of ongoing, like not decided at this point?
Correct.
Yes, I've just used assumptions.
Okay. And it's probably not. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
All right, go ahead, Christine.
All right, so the principal office and special service admin, there's a 4% increase there due to health insurance premiums. The business office has health insurance premiums, and we increased the audit contract, an increase to our audit contract, and added some professional services. Buildings and grounds, there's a small increase for heating and electricity costs. And under safety, we have just a one-time expense that Andrew put in for the safety budget. For transportation, it's the annual contract increase, and we also increased the athletic transportation to match the actuals. Debt service, there's a slight decrease in the interest payments, and then we are budgeting for an anticipated food service deficit. The next slide just shows you that colorful pie chart. The next slide is expenses by category. So this separates out all the salaries from each of the programs that we just talked about. So salaries, there's almost 6% increase. Benefits, there's a 9.6% overall increase. Professional services, so this is 504 and special education requirements. It's the normal year-to-year increase for those contracted services. Under purchase services, the building principals were able to decrease a lot of areas and supplies and that sort of thing. Purchase services. So that's a decrease of 5%. Contracted services, again, this is special ed requirements and the normal year-to-year increase for transportation. Supplies and equipment, these are buildings and grounds needs. And Andrew was able to decrease the equipment because we purchased equipment this year. Dues and fees, there's a small decrease there. And then again, the food service deficit. Or anticipated deficit, I'm sorry. Expenses by category. And then the next slide, we were asked to put this in the breakdown of salaries. Do you want to talk?
So in last board meeting's public comment, there was a request to put how these salaries were broken down. The board had seen this chart before on November 6th. So within the licensed admin column or administrators, there's 12 humans in those positions. Non-licensed administration, there's 4 people representing that number. The custodial staff, there's 14 custodians. Instructional assistants is 37. The support staff and central office administrative assistants, there's 19 people in that category. And the teachers, we have 165. And then the other category includes substitutes, crossing guards, school board stipends, just smaller bits that don't fit anywhere else.
On the revenue side, the first line is the education spending grant. So this is the balancer from after we calculate all the revenues below that. This is the tax revenue that we need to generate. We have a placeholder for the tech center payment because we haven't received that information yet. I'm just going to highlight some of the other areas. In tuition, I'm excited to report that we have 7 students that are going to continue tuitioning to Montpelier High School in the middle school. The other area I would highlight is the after-school revenue. We decreased that based on the actuals that we're generating from the after-school program.
Meaning that the revenue came in more than what was.
Yeah, what we anticipated for this current year and what we budgeted for, it's coming in a lot lower than we anticipated. So I just wanted to make sure that that reflected the actuals and we weren't counting on more revenue in that area. Sure. The next line that I'll highlight is the prior year surplus. So this is a placeholder. I put 400,000 in there. That's what we've been doing in the prior years. So that will be a board decision based on, you know, once we get to the talking about the tax rate, you might want to change that. And also I just need a nod that 400,000 is a good placeholder for now.
Can I make a minor technical point? The top line, the education spending grant, that is what the statewide education fund provides. That is not tax revenue that the district needs to generate. The district has a homestead tax rate, which does generate a small portion of that, maybe around a quarter, but definitely not 27 million or 25 million. That's what the education fund provides the district.
Thank you for clarifying that. Sorry. See, moving down, I'm just going to highlight the IDEA, and you can see the $300,000 decrease in that revenue. So next slide is the revenue pie chart. And then the next slide is the capital plan. I just wanted to show the board that in this current year, we've used up most of the capital projects money. The high school, needed a roof. So we've dropped the balance to about $4,000. I did put in the $270,000 for next year. And the next slide is the fund balance slide. This is a different, or a slide that we don't usually include, but because I'd like to talk to the board about the assigned fund balance, and if you do want to contribute 400,000 of your fund balance to your revenues this year, then you can go down and see that the track there's been money spent to date on that. The net zero study is still a set aside. That leaves you with a fund balance of 2.9 million, and the 2% policy that you have is 616,000. So the amount that you have to spend is 2.3.
Do you want us to talk about that right now, Christina?
No, I don't think we need to yet.
Okay.
I think maybe next board meeting, the board can pontificate on that.
How much, if any, to
Right.
use? Okay.
Yeah. So for the discussion and next steps, I'd just like to throw it out to our administrators who are at home to see if there's any comments they want to make to the school board regarding budget deliberations or anything. Hearing none. Appropriate wait time. They'll jump in if they need to. So the discussion for the board to have is what's the board's goal regarding tax implications of our budget? And what information does the board need as the budget process moves forward? So just keeping in mind that the upcoming meetings, December 18th, will be the actual first budget presentation with potential tax rates, hopefully. And then January 8th and 22nd will be revising as needed. And on the 22nd, we'll need to warn that budget to go to our town clerks. And March 3rd, it will be the budget informational meeting. And then March 4th is town meeting day, of course. So just a timeline of events there. So I would open it up for board questions and stop sharing now and discussion.
Could you answer the question that was asked earlier to just verify how after school is currently funded in each of the places it's provided, and is that included in the budget?
Yes, so after school program is in co-curricular. So we still have budgeted for the Roxbury after school program.
And then is there a shared model for like the revenue or like a sliding scale payment, or is it provided free of charge?
No, there's a sliding scale.
That's what I thought. Okay.
Just like at the middle school for that after school, which is
Enrichment.
what we run,
Mhm.
which is different than the part two that is a
Yep.
private entity running it at UES.
Oh, okay.
All of that is included in the co-curricular piece, because keeping in mind, this is an almost level funded budget. So there are no major cuts to this or reductions to this budget. No questions?
Well, I had some, but they were answered.
Oh, good. That's good then.
I guess it would be nice to know, but this is a nice to know what we are, because I see in the presentation that we have the actual after school revenue from FY 24, and then we have what we budgeted for FY 25, but we don't have anything yet that we know as far as what's coming in. But we can see that you've obviously drastically reduced income projections from after school.
I did, based on what we've received to date.
Yeah.
Without the weighted,
Tax implications, I mean, just kind of without knowing what the tax implications, I mean, this looks like a great budget to me. And, you know, I don't think we want to cut for the sake of cutting if we don't have to cut. And
So what I'll say verbally, that
yes,
we don't know on paper just quite yet, and I will invite my tax cronies and Jake and Jill to jump in at any time. Is that based on the preliminary numbers that we have that are, I would call softer than what they may be typically at this point in the year, or with more uncertainty surrounding them.
yes.
Our tax rates look very good right now. Like, yay, fabulous.
With the budget
As we've
presented
designed
it.
it,
I
a
see.
near level program budget. However, I am concerned, and this concern may not come to fruition. It's just my concern, is because of a lot of unknown factors that the tax department may not have had the most accurate figures to create the dollar yield. And if those figures they were given are lower than what than what are actually coming in, then the state wouldn't generate enough revenue to fill the ed fund. So the dollar yield would have to change. And when you change the dollar yield, it significantly impacts the tax rate pretty quickly.
I would agree that there's a lot up in the air this year. You know, and I think that things are going to get tougher than they look so far. I think that there's a really, it's not relevant to us, but there's an extremely punitive excess spending penalty this year that's coming back. And I don't know if it's going to hold in its current form, because I think the districts who are impacted by it are going to come into the State House and try to get it changed, which would actually increase pressure on us. As a district that's not affected by it, we're actually sort of benefiting from it, because those ones that are pumping more money into the education fund because they're being penalized. So I think things are going to get quite a bit worse than they look at the moment. And also, I agree that like the quality of the data is not great so far. And the few school districts that I've talked to in helping them do like tax rate calculations with the whole new statewide adjustment and everything, they have more spending than we were counting for the December 1st letter. Yeah, I think it's going to be kind of a rough road. So, you know, we should brace ourselves for it.
And the
And-
challenge is we may not know that right away.
And at what point in time will the roads start to get a little rocky?
Bumpy.
A little bumpy?
Yes,
Is that the question?
yes.
You know, when people come back to the State House in January.
Yeah, so they can't start legislating until they come back to the State House, which is what, January 2nd? So that could have impacts at the, as you said, Mia, the 11th hour.
So we have to have things done by January 22nd, right?
Pretty much. We have to have a budget approved
Yes.
pretty much by that date for the town clerks to be ready to go for town meeting day.
And we don't want to do this fun dance of pulling things back and redoing them.
Say
Like
that. So say more about what you mean.
Well, like last year when, I mean, you know, the legislature kicked it back to us, what, in like late February, early March before town meeting day.
Mhm.
Yeah, and we had a chance to reconsider and we decided to take our chances and the voters said, no,
Yes.
thank you. And then we had to do it again. So
That could be a thing.
that could be a thing.
Mhm. But I don't know. But that could be a thing. If I share the presentation again. And I can show where the concern lies.
I mean, my thought is hope for the best, plan for the worst.
Oops, not there. So, this number, I don't know if you can see my cursor there. This number right here, 8.22% increase for education spending. When the Agency of Education asked for the anticipated amounts, it's very early November. And they asked the business managers for an expected or estimated increase in educational spending. Well, we haven't put pen to paper yet when they ask for that. So Christina and the other business managers around the state do the best they can with fake numbers, essentially. And so, for instance, in our estimation, and this has nothing to do with Christina and her brilliance as a business manager, with the numbers she had available to her, which were estimates and assumptions, she provided the Agency of Education with a 5% increase in education spending. However, when we looked and we didn't have the IDEA carryover, we had spent that, and we knew we had to move, that was before we had to move 3 positions into the local budget. That move right there increased our education spending by 3%. If other districts had a lower number there for education spending as well, a lower percentage, and are coming in higher, that's where the concern lies. That the tax department, Jake and his colleagues, didn't have as accurate information as they needed in order to make that dollar yield projection. And so if we need to collect more revenue as a state to fund the end fund, because remember, all the districts get what they need, get what they ask for, then the dollar yield would be the equalizer there. If the dollar yield goes lower, taxes increase.
For every $100 that the yield drops, it's going to increase our tax rate by 2%.
Every 100.
Yes. So Christine and I have started our dance with our charts of putting in what happens if this happens, what happens if that happens. And at our leadership team meeting today, Matt McLean was said, you know, how if we had to get that down to like 3% for education spending increase, what would that look like? And it's $1.1 million we'd have to decrease. So it's a considerable, with the dollar yield the way it is now. So it's a considerable decrease in order to get that education spending down, and the dollar yield significantly impacts that percentage or the tax rate.
This is a question for maybe Jake too. I mean, how much will we know at our next meeting? Do you think we'll still be kind of in 2 weeks, kind of fumbling around in the same level of darkness we are now, or will there be at least a bit more clarity, or who knows?
I did get an email from Brad James today.
Whoa,
Yes.
a late email then.
Yes.
'Cause I didn't know that happened.
Hot off the press. And we should have a first run at equalized pupils next week, hopefully.
So
Okay.
that number
That
will
will
know
help.
more.
And that number is one that doesn't fluctuate that much once we get it. Is that right?
No,
No, it
unfortunately,
moves.
that's the
It
one that
doesn't.
we get version 2, 3, and 4
Oh,
into
right.
January.
It does fluctuate, but when Christine and I have played with that number as well, like, let's take away 15 equalized pupils. What's that give us? And it doesn't influence the tax rate
Oh,
that
interesting.
much.
Okay,
Not as much as the dollar yield does.
okay.
There won't be an update of the yield in 2 weeks. The next major update won't actually be, I don't think, until after the emergency board meets in January, and they have new consensus revenue estimates for like all the state revenues, including sales tax, which all goes to the ed fund, and that affects the dollar yield. So I think that'll be the next one. Yeah, probably. So that won't change. The CLA.
Wait, who's the emergency board? I'm sorry to interrupt you. You said the emergency board meets? Who's that?
Yeah, it has a scary name, but it's the governor and the chairs of the money committees, like Senate Finance,
okay.
Senate Approps. So yeah, and okay. So they meet, and then the state economists like kind of redo the FY25 money and FY26 revenue forecast too. So that affects the ed fund in a big way. But I was going to say on CLAs, the ones that you're working with now are estimates. The tax department kind of released early estimates to try to help school boards know what's going to happen with CLAs. And the final ones won't be out until the end of December. They should be close, but they're not going to be exactly what we have right now.
Yeah.
I have a couple of questions. One is, so as far as this, what information does the board need? So even in our next meeting, we have a draft budget presentation. Will you be including the CLA and dollar yield and weighted pupils in that? Will we see that information? Could we see that?
I think it's up to the board. I would prefer you start to see that information
Yeah.
because it's transparency more than anything.
Yeah,
However, it may look really good still.
yeah,
And there's just this, piece of me that doesn't want to do it because it could drastically change.
we might set too good of expectations, or too
Right.
high of expectations. Yeah, my preference would be to take that risk and
Yeah.
to be able to see it. I just have a hard time wrapping my head around being able to make a decision.
Yeah.
And not that you're asking us to make one today. I understand that without seeing the rest of the information.
Yeah, I understand that.
Even the decision to say, well, Libby, we need to see you bring some cuts to the table, like that there's just like not enough information
Right.
to decide that. So anyway, that's a request that I have, is that at the next board meeting, even if they're soft numbers, or even if it's like, well, here's what this year's number is, and we know it's gonna change, just something that would help us, I think.
Yeah, that's what we were planning on doing, but
For the next
we
meeting. Okay,
wanted to
great.
hear that input from the board.
Okay.
With the understanding that tax rate, if we don't have different numbers, could drastically change
Yeah,
with us not doing anything.
right.
Right, but with new state numbers coming in.
I think am I interrupting somebody? Sorry.
Yep, hold on, Miriam's.
Can we see possible plans for multiple contingencies? Because I agree with the hope for the best, plan for the worst thing here. Like, I think this looks like it super reasonable and well thought out budget. And I also just from last year, I have this sense of like, wow, this just feels like way too good to be true.
Me too.
Yes, that's honestly how we feel.
And so like, I don't want to get stuck in that spot of like, oh, that all went downhill really fast and now we're sort of like shocked by it. So maybe like if we could see a plan with possible cuts in case the numbers start getting less nice, and a plan with possible additions in case the numbers somehow get more nice, that would make things, it would allow us to like consider those possibilities now. Is that possibility at all?
I have my thoughts on it, but I'd like to hear the boards first.
I will give, I'll give my thoughts. I would love to see those two. The downside, I think here's where the board might have to kind of brace itself. The downside of doing that is it's going to be easily identifiable what those cuts are. And it's going to make a lot of people feel very uneasy about their jobs and job securities. And that's a tough thing to air publicly if we don't have to. And it's I don't think it's great for mood and morale, whether it happens or not. I think what the board probably needs to be prepared to do, and one thing I want to suggest is maybe that we put on the calendar an extra meeting in January between the two that we have, in case we need to do a lot of quick work.
It's like you were in our leadership team meeting today, Jim.
Yeah.
No, it just got changed with the dates. Yeah.
I think the board will have to be in a position that if we're in cuts, that there has been a lot of thought proposed to the cuts, and that we will have to tuck our heartstrings away and realize that you know that these cuts are being proposed from a place of what our educators and administrators feel the district best needs to move forward. Because once the cuts get real, we're going to hear from the people affected, and it's going to be hard for them, but
And for us.
and it's going to be hard it's going to be hard for everyone, but I think we have to be prepared to embrace the bigger picture and be reasonable and rational, and know that there's been a lot of planning and scenarios considered in what might be proposed to us at a relatively 11th hour.
I would add to that the leadership, we were very surprised this week with when we plugged in these numbers. We called Jake and said, Jake, what are we doing wrong? Like, because we were so surprised. Thank you, Jake, for taking our call. And so we had to get reassurance. The leadership team was not expecting that to look like that. So we have been making contingencies in plan A and plan B and plan C, and looking at our efficiencies and looking at class sizes. So we do have, like, nothing will be a decision that has not been made lightly. We've already been talking about those things behind the scenes. And I would agree with Jim that if we don't have to bring those plans to fruition, then I don't want to bring them to the front stage either, because it adds stress to people unnecessarily. Significant stress.
Jill?
Something that you folks have done in the past that was really helpful, I think we don't have enough information yet, but probably by late December, January, is like the different scenarios of dollars. So like your point about if you do this to the yield, it changes the tax rate this much, like that is really helpful information. Because then we can also be like, okay, if we put in such and such from the fund balance, what does that do to the tax rate? Like, I'd like us to, to have like focus on the dollar amount and the tax rate piece rather than the details of that. So then that would inform what
that we could totally do. Yeah.
Can you all hear me? Oh,
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead, Scott.
Just really quickly, Jill, I totally agree with what you said, and just to add, Libby, your question about like what would be helpful for us to know. I really appreciate when you identify like when something is a assumption, when it's a soft right number versus when you have more confidence. And so if there's a way to identify those numbers that are soft in the presentation versus those that are relatively more firm, and then we can say, well, what then, to Jill's comment, then we can say, well, what happens if this number goes way up, and then we can sort of go from there. So just to sort of bring two threads together. And I finally got my audio working because it wasn't working before, so yay.
And I think we both, Miriam and Jason, I don't know who was first.
I think Miriam was first.
Miriam, yeah.
Okay. I hear and I totally agree with the concern about mood and morale here. But I also think my impression last year was that it was very not good for mood and morale for it to seem that these decisions were being made in 3 weeks after a shocking new set of numbers. And it just seems reasonable to me with the context that I have right now. And if somebody else who knows the system better than I do, and there are a lot of those people, wants to disagree with me, I would be very happy. But it seems reasonable to think that the numbers may not go as well as they're going right now. And that we could be surprised by that in a not super happy way. And I think that the more that we can consider it now, and the less we're blindsided by it later, just because of all the unknowns, the better this process will go. I think sometimes having to face those uncomfortable truths a little earlier than might be comfortable is productive, but I also don't want to scare a bunch of people by talking about them losing their jobs unnecessarily. So I hope that there's a middle ground there. I don't know what it is, but if there is one, I think that would be super helpful for the board to see.
Yeah. Jason.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Thanks. And Miriam, I really appreciate your stance and projection of that. And just, many of you were here last year, and I can see Joe and Catherine are on the line watching and respecting and representing their unions, or our unions. And if we go back to last January and February, and we can remember when Joe, Catherine, and Allison Waring, who's also on the line, spoke to this board, and their stress and their worry about what that unpredictability is like. And I can see Julie also came on the line, and how stressful and uncomfortable it is for us to make decisions in not only 3-week times, but to try and raise morale, hire new teachers under these circumstances, and also retain teachers and staff under these circumstances. So while I understand there is the need and appropriateness for transparency, there's also a need to respect that these are humans' lives, and we have empathy for these people that we work with day to day and that we care for, and wanting to be sure that we don't unnecessarily cause stress when the job is hard enough for everyone. So just keeping that in mind for the board, that we have people to take care for and potentially hire and or retain under extremely difficult situations. I'm not sure if Julie would like to add to that, but I'm sure that's also why she popped on.
Julie?
Hi, thanks. I was an attendee and tried to raise my hand earlier when Libby asked us to. Thank you all. And I just echoing what Jason said, I think, it's definitely, I think we all foresee this is going to be a challenging budgeting time. And I think exactly that, like we're thinking both about the care of our staff and also maintaining the highest quality education we can for our students. And I think we also need to make sure that we are, or at least would hope that the board would work to think really thoughtfully and carefully about creating a budget that will definitely pass in its first go. I think all other politics aside, I think the recent election was a clear call that a lot of people's pockets are hurting. And I just want to make sure that we're really finding ways to reach out to our community to find out what is reasonable for a passing goal, as we're coming up to this idea, because I think that there's a lot of there continues to be a lot of talk in Vermont in general, just around educational tax rates and the feeling that that's not sustainable. And so I just recognize that it's a delicate balance. So like Jason said, obviously there's a need to care and attend for our humans and the people that we have that are working, and also trying to figure out how we can create the most reasonable budget that we can get to a point of passing, because not passing creates uncertainty that puts lots of people in a position of uncertainty. And we don't want to do that either. So not an enviable position that you're in, but I just want to make sure that we have voice to that. Thank you.
Yeah.
I was gonna offer an idea. Oh, and then I see Jake with his hand up too. For the next meeting, instead of presenting like different scenarios, I wonder if we could have almost like an interactive
I was thinking the same
spreadsheet.
thing. Yeah.
Where it's like, okay, if dollar yield is this, then here's what we would maybe need to consider cutting in order to have a tax rate that we think. And the tax rate is it's a guesstimate for us,
Mhm.
right? We know.
It will
We know
always
for
be,
next
even when
year-
you warn it, it will still maybe not be the same. Yeah.
What I'm thinking about is like public sentiment. We obviously know from last year, 23% tax rate too high.
Mhm.
That was a no. We got a no vote on that. I think I'm maybe misremembering that exact number. And what we ended up at, which was 14%, 14 was like acceptable for the time being. My best guess is that if we brought a budget to our communities that included a 14% tax rate again this year, they'd be like,
Then they're done.
no thanks.
Yeah.
And so it is a little like a guessing game of what the community it will be willing to accept. I am certain there are people in our community who would say, if you can lower my education tax rate, I'd be thrilled. So anyway, it's a large spectrum, but I think if we had some kind of interactive thing, that would be I think it would get at, Miriam, what you're asking for without it being like, well, here's where it would come from. It's just more of give us that picture that we can wrap our heads around for not only what does the actual end, like education spending look like, but also what could the tax implications be? So,
And it's important. I mean, Christine and I spend hours with that interactive table together during budget season, and we certainly can do that. And it also can show the board and the community of, here are the things we have control over. If we reduce that, right, this is what happens. And if we keep that the same, but the state has to reduce something like the dollar yield to ensure that there's enough revenue generated for the education fund, that's what happens. This is what happens, and we have no control over that piece. So yeah, I think we can do that as part of the presentation. That's not a problem. Jake.
Yeah, I agree with Mia and Julie that it's really, I think, important for us or valuable really to start with like, what is the tax change that we think would pass on the first try? And in a way, it's kind of good to not have solid figures at this point, because we can crowdsource among ourselves what that number is, and then as things unfold, we can see how we're doing. Like, I personally think like 5% is probably the max. So it could be a really good place to start, I think.
Yeah, and I agree with that, and I would like to have a discussion. I'm not sure I have a number. I'm not sure 5% is kind of the number in my head. I also think honestly, it depends on what that 5% means. I think if we get to a certain level of gutting our schools, I think this community might be willing to pay more. I think if we come at them with, say, 8% with some serious cuts, and say if we cut further, we're hitting bone, is very different than coming to them with 8% when there's still some like, fat out there. So I think the details matter. Did I hear that Scott had his hand up? Scott?
Sorry.
Sorry, I can't with the glare. I can't really see hands.
Yeah, I guess I actually was about to lower my hand because I think we're all sort of winding up at the same place. The part that I don't know if frustrates me is the right word, but Jake, I think if I remember correctly, in one of our ed spending 101 sessions, you mentioned like the one thing that we really have control over is like our ed spending, right? Like all of those other variables, we actually don't have any control over. And so it is helpful to have sort of like, whatever, I don't know what confidence intervals, some understanding of those all variables and how they might fluctuate. But in the end, we don't really have control over them. And so that's the piece. It's like, I guess, knowing all of those and how they might fluctuate can help us determine what the right level of education spending is, right? So.
So if I were to repeat back to the board at the next board meeting, we'll keep the nearly level programmed budget in place, put in as many solid or squishy numbers and make it clear which are solid and which are squishy, for lack of better professional words there, in the budget. And include an interactive chart of this happens, then this happens, and that kind of thing with a tax rate predictor at the bottom.
Yeah.
Okay, we can do that. We can do that. Does the board, just for our own information as we're making a slideshow, does the board want us to keep like the expenses, revenues, enrollment, all of those slides in? Or, I mean, it's not really that important, but we can leave them in and just put them as an appendix almost. Just so they're as a part of the presentation. Okay.
It's good. I'll say it for myself. When I have gone back to previous budget presentations, for like looking for something, it's hard because they change, because if like, oh, I know enrollment numbers were in a budget presentation. I'm like,
which date?
Which date? And so that tells me and then it also feels beneficial for people who are joining the conversation at different points, for them to have the same information, whether they come to the third board meeting versus the first board meeting, et cetera.
Yep. So we may not talk about them publicly or breeze through them, but we'll include them.
Crazy idea. I love what both of you are saying. Maybe including the slides, and like if slides 1 through 10 were presented in depth on the December 4th meeting, just put that at the bottom of the slide, so that if someone joins the December 18th meeting and doesn't have all the information, they know, oh, I'll just go back to the December 4th recording and I can get that in-depth conversation.
Sure. Yep, we can do that. Okay, Christine, I think we have our marching orders.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for a good discussion.
Yeah. Will the next board meeting be also where we would say kind of thumbs up, thumbs down to the capital plan?
You'll want to think about that.
Yeah.
You'll want to think if you want to include that piece. We're actually checking with Pietro on the capital plan, because in the past we've used that, we've put that on the warning as a separate item for people to vote on. And last year what happened was they voted yes in the first round to the capital plan and voted no to the overall budget, which solidified that number for the board and wasn't a variable we could play with after when we had to make decisions for the second budget vote. So we're actually checking with our lawyers to see if we have to put that as a warned item or not, or because it's just part of the budget, right? So we're just checking on that. And if we don't have to, we probably won't put it as a separate warning, just to have more freedom there.
And it's a number, it's one of those that's quote unquote easier to play with. It could be 270, it could be 200, it could be 500, we can decide. Yeah.
Right. So we're checking on that piece. That may look different to voters this year if it comes to fruition that it doesn't need to be a separate item that voters vote on. Because in our minds, it's a similar thing as the food budget, the food service transfer, and we don't have a separate item for that. So we're checking on that piece. But the board should be thinking about how much we want to put into the capital plan, if anything at all. The board should also be thinking about, while you may not have this solidified and you don't have to by next meeting at all, how much you want to reserve from the fund balance as a revenue source. So those will just be things to be thinking about, but you don't necessarily need to, we'll keep it as is with the $270,000 expense from for the capital fund and the $400,000 revenue from the fund balance, and you can play with that number.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what Beatrice says, but I don't think we have to put it as a separate item. I think we did it just to, so it would be out there, we'd have it, we'd keep planning as a prudent item, but I think that's a choice, not a necessity.
That's kind of our hope too.
Yeah.
We want to check with our legal team.
We have, didn't feel like we had to.
I think we felt it was like a smart thing to do, just to like, we're not going to push this into the budget because of the temptation to move items around, but I'm close to 100% sure that the answer is going to be we can change that.
We'll find out.
We'll find out.
Okay.
Do a debrief of our Roxbury process.
Yeah, that sounds great.
All right.
Do you have can you pull the doc up to share it, Libby?
Sorry.
So that folks at home can see it too. So it's a good practice after you've finished a process or a project to debrief how it went. And especially because this was, as folks who maybe were there back in August when we initiated this process, this was kind of this was like a first run at using a process like this for a big decision. And so we wanted to check in with the board to see how we all thought it went. So I drew up the different steps that we followed just as a reminder. So that's what Libby is pulling up now. Starting back in August 15th is when we established what a draft process could look like. And then as the meetings went on, just about almost every meetings from the August 15th, which was our summer quote unquote retreat, we spent a little bit of time each one of those meetings on focusing on the Roxbury Village School discussion. I don't think it makes sense for me to read through this document word for word, but it basically just shows what was done at each one of those meetings, just the step that we took to move ourselves toward making a decision. And so first wanted to and then just wanted to open up to the board what we thought we did well in this process, like what supported us in making the decision and supported the community in engaging in the discussion. And then what could we do better next time to support ourselves as a board in making the decision and support our community in being engaged in the decision. So those are the two questions, or I guess 4 questions before us. And I'd love to hear board members' feedback.
Any thoughts? I mean, I thought the process went really well. Thank you, Mia, for helping design it and for taking the lead. But yeah, I thought it was deliberate. It was transparent. I think we got a lot of feedback, and I think we came to a sound decision.
Here, I'll type me so you can be part of the discussion.
Oh, Scott's got his hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Mia, for pulling this together. And yeah, I'll reiterate what Jim just said. I agree with all of that. The one piece and what I voiced in the last meeting was just about the timeline. I don't think we had a defined time frame for which the decision should be made. And so we got to last meeting and yeah, I'm still not convinced that the decision needed to be made by last meeting. But again, like I think the process was run through, and I think we did stick to sort of what we had set out to do in that process. So again, thank you, Mia.
Well, I attended almost all of the Roxbury Montpelier meetings and felt like people really had an opportunity to express their concerns and that the group did a pretty good job troubleshooting those things. And so I think the process overall, given how difficult it was as a general situation, went pretty well. And I feel like a lot of the concerns have been addressed. The committee has talked about being ready to stop meeting, and so I think things are feeling like they're getting pretty well resolved.
Thanks, Lynn. Thanks, Scott. I think, Lynn, it sounds like you're speaking to the transition committee.
Yeah.
Which was a little separate from this, but it was basically a transition committee, I think, had initially thought that the decision around the school would be covered by the committee, and they were like, nope, actually out of our scope, we got to hand that back to the board, which is when we took it on. But that put their focus on things like the busing and after school and things that were really have supported the transition for the most part.
Yeah, and really talking about concerns around blending the community for the comfort and togetherness of the kids.
Mm-hmm.
Any thoughts on what we might do differently or next time, or suggestions for improvement? Yeah.
I think we could have done more around communication as we went through the process. As like I'm picturing now, it would have been pretty great to have a dedicated page on the district website, knowing that this was a big decision, or the board, the board part of the district website, knowing that this was a big decision the board was making, even if it was something that the web page would only be there temporarily or something, just to give community members a chance to kind of be in the conversation with us for the long haul, because I think we asked folks at a pretty critical juncture, right around October, I think it was. First, we had the community forum here in Roxbury, and then we had the full community-wide survey that was held digitally. And I think people were sort of like, oh, now I'm being like asked a little bit more deliberately for my opinion, and I feel like I have to do some catching up. So I think if we had done a little bit more communicating and sharing what the information the board had, a little bit more, even just passively, like I'm saying, like a page on the website, I think would have been helpful in supporting the community and being engaged in the process a little more. I'm very, I guess, proud of the pacing that we set it at, which I think is what you were getting at, Jim and Scott, what you said about the deliberativeness of it. I think we paced it out well and gave board members a chance to sit with information and then even ask questions that either in board meetings or outside of board meetings, like emailing them to Libby, et cetera, to be able to hopefully get, make sure board members had the information they needed. So I think the pacing was a big part of being able to have that.
Yeah, I agree. Other thoughts, comments, questions? And this is obviously going to be a good process that we can keep using for similar type decisions.
It's a great idea.
Yeah.
I think that would have helped. And I think it would help with a lot of our decisions as well. Especially so the community members feel like they know like where we're headed towards and where we are in the process.
Right. If we can say at the start of it, we anticipate making a decision by X date, it will, that lends itself to, I think, to more community engagement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just looking at the generic process, and uh, so here, where it says no, in the planning piece. Well, we had timeline for decision-making process.
Yeah, that was our intent. And if I recall correctly, and that's a big if, I think even at the beginning, we were saying we would like to make this decision in time for the budget season, but it wasn't anything where we were like, actually really defined it. We could have put more clarity in there. And then I have one other thing that I think we learned sort of as we went along, that there were lots of questions that were specific to this particular topic that we wanted to make sure were answered, but that perhaps those guiding questions, those parameters that we came up with, that we pulled out of those initial big brainstorm of questions, maybe those would be good ones to start a process with, which I think we kind of like realized that about partway through. Oh yeah, we could really use these guiding questions, but those seem like really good big picture ones to guide kind of any conversation for or big decision the board needs to make. And one, though, just as a reminder, that was, does it fulfill a need in the district? What are the financial implications? And then what does our community think? So that maybe a lesson coming out of this is that we start with those, and then there are other questions that probably would be nitty-gritty questions depending on whatever topic we're addressing, but those would be good guiding parameters probably for just about any process.
Yeah, I would agree with that, because I think there were unmet expectations or unnecessary frustrations because the parameters weren't set out to begin with.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Further comments? No, thank you for this. This was a good thing to debrief. Next item, policy monitoring report, B7 tobacco prohibition. Do you have a motion to approve B7 tobacco prohibition monitoring report?
So moved.
Second?
Seconded.
Any discussion or questions? All's in favor? Any opposed? Motion passes. And now we have executive session. So we need, I think, two motions, a first motion and then a second motion, and language is provided in the agenda. The recommended first motion, I will just read it and then someone can make it. I move to find the premature general public knowledge regarding the board's labor relations agreement with employees would clearly place the board at a substantial disadvantage because the board risks disclosing its negotiation strategy if it discusses the proposed contract terms in public. Do I have a motion that echoes what I just said?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
I'm just seeing if anybody else wants a second. Oh, I'll second it. Oh, Scott will second it.
All right. Any discussion or questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? So recommended second motion, I move to enter executive session for the purpose of discussing labor relation agreements with employees under provisions of Title I, Section 313, small a 1, big B of the Vermont statutes, labor relations agreements with employees. Do I have a motion to do that?
So moved.
Have a second? We can keep it all.
Second.
Under.
Oh, Lynn got it.
Lynn got it.
Then got it. Okay, great. Discussion, questions? Kibitzing? No. All's in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. So we are in executive session. I don't know how we.
Yeah, board members who are online, I just sent you a Google Meet link to your MRPS emails. So when I find a room for us to go to, then I will jump on that.
And Orca, I think feel free to go.
Yep.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Don't know how the weather is out there, but I think the sooner you leave, the better. Huh?
Slow rolling.
Yeah,
Slow rolling.
Not
not really happening. That's unfortunate.
99%.